I might look like I'm wearing something cozy because I'm wearing a turtleneck, but I'm also wearing shorts because I'm sitting right next to the heater. Lolly, why don't you just turn your heater down? Our heater doesn't do down. It does on, and it does off. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. Hello folks, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing my October wrap-up. I'm going to chat about all the books that I read in the month of October. I read 11 books, according to my notes. The notes have been wrong before. So the first book I finished was Reclaim the Stars, 17 Tales Across Realms and Space. This is a speculative fiction anthology featuring all authors of Latin American heritage. It is edited by Zoraida Cordova, and she does have a story in here, and I mostly listen to the audiobook, which is narrated by Almarie Guerra. The other authors featured are Vita Ayala, David Bowles, J.C. Cervantes, Sarah Faring, Romina Garber, Isabel Ibanez, Anna-Marie McLemore, Yamila Sayed Mendez, Nina Moreno, Cersei Moskowitz, Maya Motaine, Linda Raquel Nieves Perez, Daniel Jose Older, Claribel A. Ortega, Mark Oshido, and Lilian Rivera. I really enjoyed this. I have not read too many short story anthologies, but usually my experience has been very hit or miss. You know, you're going to enjoy some stories more than others, but there was something about this where like I was enjoying every single story. Like I definitely have some that stick with me that were like favorites, but like the average caliber, my average enjoyment was much higher than anything I had ever read. Excuse you. Oh, I have a book delivery. Oh, are you serious? That wasn't scheduled to be delivered until like next Thursday. It's Saturday. God bless the U.S. Postal Service. Anyway, that was worth getting distracted for. Okay, here's one thing I did kind of a feeling I remember. Usually I feel like when I read short stories, I struggle with the shortness, especially like speculative fiction and fantasy short stories, because like I feel like we don't get enough world building, or we get only world building. To add in that speculative element, I think is something that a lot of other authors struggle to do in a way where I feel satisfied with the whole story being told to me. And I feel like that was something that was successful in these stories, was I didn't come out of that story feeling like I didn't get a good sense of the world, or that we didn't get character development. Like, it made me really excited to have a taste for all of these authors. Like, I know there were some other people who read it and thought it was fine. I'm thinking of Angela at Literature Science Alliance in particular, but she reads a lot of short fiction and short story collections, so she's got a lot more of things to compare it to. But, I mean, she liked it. She just, clearly I had stronger feelings about it than she did. But overall, like, people have been liking it. So I think if you like short stories, if you like speculative fiction, if you want to get a taste for these authors, I think this is a great introduction, you know, a great sampler of things. And I also think, like, the caliber of stories themselves are, like, do stand on their own. So, great. And then I reread The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin, narrated by Robin Myles. I listened to the audiobook of this. Of course, it's a reread. It's a well-known series. It's book 3 in the series, the Broken Earth trilogy. Still fantastic. I need to read more N.K. Jemisin. Like, the fact that I've read through this series twice and haven't really branched out from that. I have read The City We Became. That was the first thing of hers I read, and I did really enjoy it. But it's so different. And it's been so long. But anyway, yeah, this is such a solid conclusion. I definitely understand why all 3 books won the Hugo Award for the year they were published. I know this video is going to be always longer than I want it to be, so we'll just move on. It was great. It was a great time. Love it. Now we have a book that I actually took some notes on. Next, I finished Lakelore by Anna-Marie McLemore. So this is a YA queer fantasy that follows, let's see, a trans boy and a non-binary or gender fluid kid named Lore, and they met when they were young and experienced something weird, and then they like went to different schools and lived in different cities. But then Laura's family moves to Bastien's town and they meet up again, and the weird things start happening again. And through these weird fantastical experiences, they kind of work through things that they're going through. You know, in addition to being queer, Bastien has really highly symptomatic ADHD, and Lore has dyslexia, like also like very highly symptomatic, very difficult to manage dyslexia. So these two kids dealing with the queerness and their disability gives them multiple layers of weirdness that they have to navigate in the world. And thankfully both their families are fairly supportive. I mean, we do get some moments of like people just like not really understanding what they're going through, saying, you know, the unintentionally ableist things of, well, can't you just do this? Or have you just tried doing that? And like, you just need to try harder. You just need to stop doing that. It's not said with malice, but it's also a lack of understanding of like, no, I can't stop doing that. That's not how my brain works. With that, I thought like that the depictions of ADHD and the explanations of it, and again with dyslexia and the way that they explain, you know, what their experience is compared to what a normal person's experience is fantastic. With that, one of the notes I took was it has self-descriptions that could be triggering, but it's also validating to have someone understand that experience. So what I mean is, like, if you are someone who has a mental disability and have experienced trauma because of that, because of people not understanding you or using it as a reason to make fun of you or something, take care with this. I mean, it is like young adult, and I think it is done with a lot of care, but if reading through experiences that are similar to your own would be super uncomfortable, take care with that. But I also know there's people who, in reading someone else describe it, like I said, it can be very validating to encounter somebody who understands that experience and is able to explain it in a way that you may not be able to or were not able to at the time of that experience. My one kind of standout critique of this, I'm comparing this to Miss Meteor, which is over here. This is a book that Almarie McLemore wrote in cahoots. That's not the word I want to use. Co-authored with Taylor K. Mejia. I was kind of comparing them because I read them actually not that close together. Never mind. Strike that. But I'm comparing them because the magic in Lakelore felt less real, less urgent. Like, apart from these magical experiences of going into the world under the lake, apart from it being like a distracting thing to these two kids, which is a thing that they deal with, it doesn't seem to have a lot of other real world consequences. It's not something that other people see. It's not something that leaves an imprint on their world that they have to navigate, that they have to hide, that they have to explain. To me, it's just not as interesting. I don't feel as invested in it. I'm comparing it to Miss Meteor because in Miss Meteor we have a character who she's turning into Stardust, and with that knowledge knows that she is going to disappear and she has a limited time on this earth, and that is what encourages her to make the decisions that kick off the story. And we get other characters who see elements of that fantastical happening. So the fantastical element has real world stakes, and that made it very interesting to me, whereas they're just comparing it like, you know, and the thing is, like, the magic elements of the descriptions are beautiful. I do think they do add something to the story, but I mean, what a great example of the comparison is The Thief of Joy. But that was just something that I found my attention being drawn to, was I was just like, I mean, these descriptions of this fantastical thing are super cool, but so what? I do still think it's really good. I need to read more things by McLemore, because so far I've really enjoyed their writing. And yeah, if it's on your radar, I would definitely say give it a shot. It was still very much a good time. Okay, next thing I finished was Bindle Punk Bruja by Desideria Mesa. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. This was an arc that I got through NetGalley. Oh boy, setting up the setup. So this takes place in 1920s Kansas City, I believe. And it follows our protagonist, who is a white passing woman whose family is Mexican, and she has a different father than some of her siblings, so she is white passing. And with that, she has gone out into the world as a white woman and gotten a job both as a reporter for a newspaper and then running a speakeasy nightclub, which I have questions about her time management of being able to do both of those things. It's fiction. Suspension of disbelief. It's great. And with that, you know, she's able to earn more money for her family than the work opportunities that her brother or other members of her family are able to do. So the book starts off with her coming to a Sunday dinner with her family. Her brother in particular is like resentful of how easy she has it because she's white passing, and she's frustrated that he doesn't understand the layer of her, like, yes, she's white passing, but she's also a woman in the 1920s. Like, there's a bunch of shit that she has to deal with because of that. And the fact that, like, she has to hide herself. But he's frustrated that, you know, she's always going to be able to, even as a woman, she's going to be able to have more job opportunities and make more money than him. So, anyway, so we see a lot of tension and, like, potential resentment. And I think the beginning was a bit rough because I think it hammered down on those issues too much for too long. Like, I understood what you were trying to say after one paragraph. Why are we still talking about the same thing 3 pages later? I get it. That's just part of the setup. This is a speculative fiction novel. So the fantastical element comes in with she has inherited her grandmother's magic, and the magic is kind of vague. There's definitely like an earth magic aspect to it. Her grandmother is very skilled at like putting protection spells into plants and like making tinctures and tonics and stuff. And then our protagonist, I forget her name, and she goes by multiple names depending on whether she's like with her family or using her white passing persona, so that's doubly confusing. But our protagonist, she has like this charm ability where like she can charm people, particularly men, especially when she kisses them, but that kind of backfires because then they kind of like become obsessed with her, and that's you know, she has to use it kind of carefully, and it really impacts her ability to have intimate relationships because of this power. She always mistrusts whether someone's affection for her is genuine or if it's like the magic talking. But with her ability to like charm and touch people, especially with a kiss, she's also like a little bit of a mind reader. So that's something she has used a lot to, especially in her speakeasy job, to navigate the mobsters that she has to pay off, that she's renting the property from, that she's getting the alcohol from. So there starts to be a lot of really interesting dynamics of like, how is she navigating her chosen profession at this time as a woman, as technically a woman of color. Like, again, I was like, it's a rough beginning, but if the description of the story interests you, get through chapter 2. Like, get to the end of chapter 2 before you like make an assessment. There's definitely some things about the writing that I didn't love, and I don't know if I can remember what the issue was. I do remember that, oh boy, this author loves to show you that she did a bunch of research about 1920s lingo. Like, oh, that's what it was. It was like every noun had an adjective, especially like in the beginning. So it's like she didn't just say she took off her hat. She took off her cloche hat. She took off her bell-shaped hat. You would if you referenced an item multiple times, she would use a new descriptor each time. And it's like, you've already described that it's brown. You don't need to come up with a new word for brown every time you reference this thing. That was a thing that I noticed and was like, I'm not enjoying this. But either it got better or I got used to it. I don't remember exactly. And again, I didn't take many notes. So, did I finish telling you what it's about? There's a lot going on. That is kind of a critique. I do think there's a lot going on. She's dealing with the nightclub thing, and dealing with wanting to start her own nightclub so that she doesn't have to deal with this particular strain of gangsters anymore. But as a woman, she's not allowed to own property. So that's a whole thing. She's dealing with, her brother, who she has all this tension with, is also like the lead bartender in her club. So she's dealing with having to act like his boss in the workplace and have nobody know that she's actually Mexican. At some point, like, Al Capone gets involved in the story. Like, that was the one thing. Like, that was like the one thing where I'm like, you didn't need that storyline. Like, I know it's the 1920s and it's bootleggers, like, and Al Capone's like the big name, but like that was like one element too much for me. It's weird, like I have so many critiques, but I also had a really great time with it. And so next we've got this novella, Exodus 23 by Freydís Moon. So this is a queer speculative romance novelette that features a trans protagonist who, what was the premise? They got arrested for something and had to get bailed out, or like something where it's not quite community, it's like community service for his mom who bailed him out or something. She's like, if I do this, you have to go do that. Like, you have to agree to go do this thing in order for me to like help you, because you're messing up a lot and you need some consequences. That's kind of my memory of the setup. So our protagonist is trans and goes out to help rebuild a church in the middle of the desert with this one other guy, this like super hot Brazilian carpenter guy who ends up being more than he seems. As evidenced by the title, we've got an otherworldly creature of a biblical nature. And so they're rebuilding this church and like building this relationship. And the kind of the theme that goes through this is it's kind of wrestling with like self-love and acceptance in the face of a transphobic and queerphobic world, and like the struggling to feel enough, especially if you come from a Christian religious household where a lot of what the human spokespeople of Christian religions say is like being queer is a sin. So, but trying to tease out how to still feel good and whole and worthy and wanted in the eyes of a higher power, and kind of tease out that feeling separate from what the human voices are saying. And it's done in a very steamy, paranormal manner. That's the story. I definitely wanted it to be longer, especially because once we learned the purpose of why that church where it is, and like that's a whole storyline right there. I want to see more about that and the offer that our protagonist gets in relation to that. But I did have a good time with it, and this is definitely an author I will keep an eye on. I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued with the themes that they chose to explore and the way they've done them. And they ask some metaphysical, biblical questions that I like it when I find an author who's willing to like engage with these ideas. Ooh, okay. And then possibly the most fascinating book that I read all month, Detransition, Baby by Torrey Peters, and I mostly listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by Renata Friedman. Oh boy. What a trip. I had seen a couple of people talk about this book, but the reviewer who put this very high on my radar was Books and Bow. Willow is a fantastic book reviewer. If you don't know about them, they read a lot of translated fiction and a lot of queer fiction, and their reviews are so in-depth and thoughtful. Love them. I don't remember if it was a dedicated review. It might have been, but like their review about this was fascinating. I will link it because it sold me on this book in a way that like no one else's descriptions did. So the premise of this book, we follow 3 characters. So we open up with following Ruiz, who is a trans woman who gets a call from her ex-girlfriend, Amy, who was another trans woman who is now going by the name Ames and living as a man, though we do get some conversation in there about like, well, like, yes, they are living as a man, they're letting the world see them and treat them as a man, but they're definitely not a cis man. Like, there is still transness in that identity somewhere, so it's something to keep in mind. And Ames has gotten his boss / girlfriend Katrina pregnant. Katrina is an Asian woman who is divorced. So Katrina realizes she's pregnant. She's trying to decide whether or not to keep the baby, and Ames is having this existential crisis of he can't see himself as a father. He could see himself as a parent, but not a father. There's something about that identity that has a block to him. He doesn't think that Katrina really understands the nuance of that father / parent distinction, because she's, to her knowledge, has, you know, she has mostly lived her life as a cis straight woman. There's just questions that she's never had to wrestle with. So Ames calls up Ruiz because Ruiz desperately wants to be a mother, desperately wants a baby. And at this time, biologically, that's not something that she can achieve with her own body. And this book definitely explores all of the hurdles for trans parents to become parents by other means. So Ames kind of wants to invite Ruiz into this relationship as like a co-parent. Ruiz gets to raise a child. Ames gets someone who understands a bit of the complexity and nuance of his relationship to parenthood. And Katrina gets a support system to raise this unplanned child. That's kind of like the pitch that Ames makes, is like, yes, this is super weird, and the way that we broke up, the way that Ames and Ruiz broke up was super messy and weird, and they still need to like work through all of that shit, but but he's very much like, hear me out, I think this can work, let's all at least meet and talk about it and spend a couple weeks thinking about this. Also, Katrina didn't know that Ames used to live as a trans woman. I don't know if I like that description I'm using of like living as a trans woman, living as a man. You know, this is like a complex issue on its own, on top of being like a super rare and personal experience, so that I just haven't like heard or read a lot of accounts of something like this, so I don't have like a stock of phrases in my brain. I have to make this up as I'm going along, and I'm trying to be careful, and if I step on it, I might need some help realizing I've done that. So, okay, continuing on. Anyway, so that's the premise. And this is and it's fascinating the way, like, the only other book I've read that I can kind of compare this to is All's Well by Mona Awad. There's something about they have like a similar genre of weirdness, and I want to be cautious with saying that because I don't want to be like, oh my god, look at trans people trying to be parents or trying to you know, do this or that. Isn't that weird? That's not what I'm saying. Nope. I want to be careful about that. But especially Ruiz in particular, the way this author gets into these characters' heads and really picks apart the way that being trans has shaped the way they look at the world and the way that they look, in particular, the way they look at the way heteronormative people live and be like, how do you think that that's normal? Like, this is normal. This is the standard everyone should be with. Like, how do y'all not realize that's fucked up? So, like, that's some aspect of it. And just these, I think this is really a book this is a character book. Like, as much as, like, that plot premise is fascinating, this is really a book about the characters and their complex identities and the way that their experiences and their identities shape the way they see the world and how these very massive complex identities are, like, interacting and butting up against each other. It was fascinating. This is definitely another author I'm going to keep my eye on. And I definitely think there's going to be aspects of the trans experience that some readers are going to take issue with. And to that I say, well, of course, human beings are complex. Like, one trans person is going to look at this and be like, I think this is great. And another person's going to be like, but that just, like, encourages stereotypes, or that just encourages violence. What the fuck are you doing encouraging that? Like, being cool with that. I mean, that's just being human. Like, there is no one-size-fits-all way to be anything. So keep that in mind when reading about this experience, where it's like, it is also the fact that it's fiction. So things can be exaggerated or pushed to a limit in a way that is more safe than in real life. But it's, like, even if there's things in here that, like, don't sit neatly into your brain, it's a fascinating thought experiment. It's a fascinating psychological exploration of, hey, you throw all of these complex dynamics into a pot, what does it boil down to? Okay, and then we've got two books that I read. Then we've got a duology that I read back to back. First, I read The Keeper of Night by Kylie Lee Baker. Mostly listening to the audiobook, which is narrated by Rebecca Yeo. And I read this kind of impulsively and very quickly because I had gotten an audio arc of the sequel, The Empress of Time, and because of the way that NetGalley books kind of expire, it was expiring quickly, so I had to be like, oh, I gotta read this so I can read that in time before that expires. So this premise is we follow Ren, who is half British Reaper, half Japanese Shinigami, which are both, like, demigod creatures responsible for reaping the souls of the dead. So, and this takes place in late 1800s? Late 1800s, that's all it says. Late 1800s. Vague time period. So Ren has always felt out of place in Britain because she's half Japanese. You know, she's always been referred to as a foreigner. She's got some different magical abilities that set her apart. Her father is one of, like, on the leading council people, but he's renounced her and named her brother as heir because he's white. But he clearly doesn't have an aptitude to be a good Reaper, so it's clearly this weird rejection of her racial identity. The book opens on certain events and she basically has to flee England. She takes her brother with her to go to Japan because she's like, fine, you call me Japanese, you call me foreigner my whole life, I'll just go back to where you think I belong. And she gets there and everyone still treats her like a foreigner because now they see the fact that she's not whole Japanese, that she dresses different, that she doesn't know the customs, that she doesn't speak the language. So there's a lot of frustration in the fact that, like, well, when I'm over there, you think I'm Japanese, but as soon as I'm here, I don't fit in here either. And just like that tension of not having a foot solidly in either world. So that's something that is heavily explored in this world, and continues a little bit into book 2. And in book 1, she goes to the reigning goddess of death there in Japan to try to get information about her mother, and the death god sends her on a quest to complete these things for me, and then I will give you this information. So we've got, a fantasy quest arc. We get a lot of exploration of Japanese mythology. I enjoyed the series. I definitely enjoyed book 1 a little bit more than book 2. I think the issue is book 2 is a lot of the same of book 1. A lot of the quest element, the mythology element, similar tensions with her and her brother, similar, like, romance arc. And the thing is, like, I don't think it's bad. I think it's just not novel. It's just, I mean, the formula worked the first time, so let's repeat it the second time, and you're gonna lose the novel aspect of it, but it doesn't make it bad. I think if you like book 1, you're not gonna have a bad time with book 2. But yeah, I really liked this first one. This is a YA novel, I should say. And for a YA novel, I think it gets quite dark. Of course, we're dealing with, like, death gods. There's quite a bit of violence, and also the fact that we're dealing with gods and demigods and non-human characters. There's definitely a lot of exploration of, like, dark morals that are outside of human moral guidelines, because, I mean, they're immortal creatures, they serve a different purpose, like, they don't have to live by human rules because they're not human. Here's, like, an example of that. But how could I not relish the feeling of being able to crush bones like biscuits when all of my life it had been my bones breaking? Was it not supposed to feel glorious to finally be stronger than someone, to finally bring someone to their knees and make them feel fear instead of feeling it myself? Did that make me a monster? And did it matter if it did? So, anyway, if that sounds good, I definitely recommend this duology. Alright, so next I read Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I'd never read any Robin Hobb before. This is book 1 in the Farseers trilogy. So we follow a young boy named Fitz, who is discovered to be the bastard son of one of the princes in line to inherit the throne. His father, something happened. I don't remember. It's chunky. It's a chunky high fantasy. Something happens and his father, like, abdicates his succession. But then, like, because of that, he is killed for it. But anyway, being a bastard, there's something about his existence that's still risky because he does have a claim, however tenuous, to the throne, and it could upset the line of succession. Even if he doesn't have any dreams of upsetting the order of things, somebody else could use him as a pawn. So he is dedicated to be trained to be a royal assassin. With that, he also has, there's like 2 types of, like, magical abilities in this world. One of them is, let's see, I think one of them is called, like, the Wit. And it's his ability to connect telepathically with animals, which the guardsman who is raising him initially has a lot of issues with it. So there is some trigger warning for like animal death. It does kind of happen, sort of happen off page, but you definitely, there's still a lot of, like, emotional investment in those moments. And then there's another moment when the boy is connected to an animal as they are fighting and being injured. So I think that's a recurring trigger warning with this series because of his connection to animals. Like, when bad shit happens, you also get the perspective of the animals, and some people don't want to deal with it or need some forewarning about that. He's also being trained in the magic of the skill, which is like telepathy with humans, being able to like have a psychic link, more not telepathy, like a psychic link to another human, partially like to be able to like see into their memories and like see what they're experiencing, and when it's really advanced, being able to actually like control, like use someone else's body as like a host body and control them. In the book, we are definitely early days of his ability to use these abilities. So this is a very political heavy world, and the fact that we're also seeing this from the eyes of like a young person, it's interesting. It's a very interesting perspective because there's a lot of big goings on in there, and especially being trained as an assassin, you are a key piece in that. But because he's on the outside of, he's never in the room when these decisions are being made. He's a bastard. He's only like 12, 14. Like, he doesn't know the grand scope of everything that's going on. Anyway, can you tell that I like enjoyed this a lot? It's definitely fantasy for fantasy lovers. It's funny, I saw someone like have a list, like do a video of like 3 books I recommend for getting into fantasy, and one of them was like one of these books. I'm like, oh fuck no. What? Are you kidding? No, this is not beginner level fantasy. Why would you do that? Honey, just because you love it doesn't mean that someone who's never read fantasy before is going to also love it. Like, that's not how that works. Anyway, so it's not like the most magic intensive fantasy series, but there's a lot of moving parts. Like, no wonder so many of her series can take place all in the same world, because she has set up so many grand like political tectonic plates, and some of them are going to crash with a vengeance, and some of them are going to like creep slowly over many books and many series. Like, what was it? I had this book on my TBR for books I need to read before the end of the year, and no, wait, it was end of the year book tag, where it's like, predictions of like what could be a new favorite, and I was like, I don't know if this book will be a new favorite, but I feel like this is going to be maybe a new favorite author, or at least like a new author that I'm very excited about, and that's true. Anyway, so yeah, I need to get my hands on more books by Robin Hobb and continue on with this world. And I think like the complexity of this world also is going to give this series a lot of reread value, because like it's one thing to like read, like to glean information as things are being uncovered, and it's another thing to like know what happens and then go back and see, I see how these pieces were built. An exciting experience. Lovely. I missed one. I thought we had 2 left. We've actually got 3 left. Didn't I say my notes say one thing, but sometimes they're wrong? Anyway, okay, continuing on. Okay. Then I finished Cart and Cwidder by Diana Wynne Jones. This is the first book in the Dalemark Quartet. This was part of my Amnesia Reads TBR, where I reread books that I know that I've read, and it's been so long, or because of the state of mind when I read them, I don't remember anything about them. The only thing I remembered from this series was book 4 has somebody traveling back in time to this world. That's literally all I remembered. Anyway, so this is a medievalish inspired fantasy. I know that each book kind of follows like a very different perspective. I think it's sometimes characters from one book does cross paths with other ones, but it doesn't follow the same cast of characters as the protagonists in each series. So this is, I believe, I would call it middle grade, maybe like older edge of middle grade. So we're following a band of musician travelers, and they are part of this world where it's divided between like the South and the North, and they're kind of like at war with each other. Not necessarily like an active war, but there's definitely like a tension between them, and like traveling musicians, they are very valued because they will carry news from one region to another, because most other people are not permitted to travel between the two regions. So they are currently in the south, and we follow mostly like his teenage son, who plays a Cwidder, which I think my picture of it is like it's kind of like a large lute. And they're traveling, and they're on their way north. And the thing about the North and South, the North is like the land of freedom. You know, they love music, they love arts, they're about freedom and everything. And in the South, it's much more like totalitarian. Like, yes, music is permitted, but you have to be very, very careful about what you say and what you sing. If something could be interpreted as being coded or being revolutionary, you could get arrested and hanged without so much as a trial, because you were inciting resistance and revolution, and that is not tolerated. So they do have to be very careful in the South. And they pick up a passenger, and they're on their way going north, and then things happen. Can't really get into spoilers. And then like the last the three like younger kids, or like the two younger kids and the passenger, now have to try to make their way north by themselves, because they have to deliver something important. Again, I'm being super vague because it's not a very long book and there's a bit of spoiler in there. And with that, the young boy inherits his father's large bass Cwidder, which supposedly is magical and is from the time of Oberon, who was like this magical historical figure. Not necessarily magical, but like mythological historical figure. And he discovers that he can kind of like sing his intention into the world, and that is used to help them get out of tight spots and deliver the important information that they are carrying. So that's kind of the setup of this book, and I'm super curious to get back into the rest of the world and see. All right, this is the setup, like, and I know it ends like in a big battle, but I don't remember, like, is this the same time period? Is this the same like North and South conflict? I don't remember at all. But I did really enjoy it. Interesting, and I will hopefully not wait forever to reread the rest of the series and figure out what happens. So next book was another audio arc I got from NetGalley. This is Valley of Shadows by Rudy Ruiz. This was interesting. I don't know if I would say I loved it, but I did really like it. I'm kind of debating getting a physical copy so I can reread it and kind of like have it as something to compare to. So this is a speculative historical fiction. The fantasy is very light in here. It's maybe like magical realism. We deal with like ghosts and maybe kind of like shamanic healing power kind of level of magic, like a little bit of like divination, visions, like that's kind of the level of it. And like ghost apparitions. That's like the level of magic that we're dealing with. So this is a historical fiction, and we follow our protagonist. I never remember names. Sorry, y'all. He is the former sheriff of this small town called Olvido, which kind of translates to forget, or forgetting, forgotten, to forget in Spanish. And it's on the border. It's on the Mexico-American American-Mexican border. And this is a town where the Rio Grande has shifted. And one day these people, they went to bed in Mexico and woke up in America, because legally the border between America and Mexico is the path of the Rio Grande. And I did look it up, and the river has shifted a little bit over time. I think not as drastically as what is portrayed in the book. So I think the idea of like an entire town suddenly being transferred from one country to another is fictional, but it is based on like some real geological history of the Rio Grande shifting its course over time. Our dude is a former sheriff of this town, and one day on his ranch, the current mayor and another dude come to him and say, hey, there's been a murder. We need you. Can you please help us and come take a look at it? He's like, I'm not the sheriff anymore. Sorry. Like, see, but the issue is it's the sheriff who's been killed, and his entire family has been killed in a very strange ritualistic murder. So, I mean, our protagonist really doesn't want to be involved. He wants to be on his land. His wife has passed away. He's still really dealing with that grief because of the circumstances of her death, and he wants to be on the land, like, where she's buried. Part of this is because, like, her ghost, like, appears every night, and he doesn't want to miss it. He doesn't want to be away from it. But something tells him that, like, fuck. But he gets convinced to come investigate what's going on, and yeah, shit's weird. And more ritualistic murders start happening. What they are is they are kind of like a Mesoamerican inspired ritual, but like the white people in the town don't know. So it's either like, oh, is it like the Mexicans who are killing these people, or is it the native Apache people? Is that who they are? Apache? Because there's a woman who, she's kind of the like clairvoyant healer character in this story who accompanies our protagonist. Hold on. Yeah, so she's Apache Mexican. She's Apache on her father's side and Mexican on her mother's side. So the Apache are also in the area, and there's still a lot. This is like, you know, early mid 1800s Wild West America. There's a lot of multi-layered racial tension still going on. So our protagonist, hey, since I looked this up, I can actually like remember what his name is. Let's do that. Solitario Cisneros. And solitario means lonely or alone or the only one. Which is fitting because part of his arc is in recovering from the grief of his wife. He's kind of really set himself up to be lonely, and part of his arc is kind of learning to like open up and like learn that like it's okay to like let people in. That's not a betrayal of what you had with your wife. So anyway, Solitario is investigating this because it's kind of like a race against the clock to get answers before it inspires too much more violence in the town, and figure out what's going on and why. Like, why are you so, like, what's with the ritualistic aspect? Like, who are you trying to frame for this, and what is your goal? Yeah, so I liked it because I mean it's definitely a bit outside of my genre. It's definitely a mystery. There is some violence. I would say because of like the ritualistic murders, there's like some horror elements, but it's not a horror novel. There's definitely a mystery aspect. There's some like shootout and high paced scenes, but it's not high action all the way through. We also get a lot of flashbacks to Solitario in the Mexican army while Mexico was fighting for its independence. So it's definitely historical fiction. Is like historical mystery, I think, is definitely like the leading genre things, and then it's got a bunch of these other elements thrown in there. It's an interesting like cross genre thing. So like again, like it's not the genre I'm usually drawn to, so I'm not like jumping out of my seat in dealing with it, but I feel like this is a solid entry into whatever genre it wants to get shelved as. I think this could be like an intro to historical fiction for fantasy readers, and likewise for like historical fiction and mystery readers, it could be an intro into having some fantasy in your book if these are like elements that you don't usually read. Yeah, I thought I appreciated the historical time setting because it kind of puts the Mexican Revolution in context with some other world events, which I really like when I learn about history or I read a historical fiction that kind of isn't so isolated on this thing, but is like, hey, this was happening at the same time as this other thing, which is what you learned about in school, and then you don't learn about this, or like you never learn how these things are actually connected to each other. If this is all on your radar, I think it's well done. I think definitely recommend, like, worth checking out. Okay. And then the last book, the one I almost forgot about, The Time of Contempt by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the second of the Witcher series. And again, I mostly listen to this on audio, which I will have narrators and titles and authors and anything else relevant in the translation in the description box below if you want to reference them in the future. It's weird because I do really enjoy these Witcher books that I'm reading, and I'm enjoying the world, but like it's such a complex world, and then I also get bits of the stories mixed up with what's happening in the show that I have a really hard time describing what happens in the books. But let's see, I believe the title comes from multiple conversations that reference the rising tension of the war, the burgeoning war with the elves and with Nilfgaard. Nilfgaard is this one region that's kind of been invading and taking over various places. So it's like there's definitely war, but it is a war, like a battlefront that is advancing, and the tensions that are rising is going to lead to this time of contempt where people are just like, people from different sides are just gonna like turn on each other. You know, it's like the simmer before the roiling boil of conflict. Let's see what happens. So Ciri has been training with Yennefer, and something happens. The place where they are, or is it like they're traveling? Something happens, the things get attacked, she gets separated, and Ciri goes, kind of disappears and is like trying to make her way back to safety, but also like avoid capture. And Yennefer is also trying to like figure out what happened. Let's see, the description is: a coup threatens the Wizard Guild. War breaks out across the lands. A serious injury leaves Geralt fighting for his life. I don't even remember that injury. I mean, I do have a memory like a goldfish, and I listen to the audiobook, and a lot of it just goes in one ear and out the other. So it's not surprising, but also, like, I don't remember a lot of it. And Ciri, in whose hands the world's fate rests, has vanished. Oh, part of this is people are looking for Ciri in earnest because she has a claim to a throne. So I think it's like Nilfgaard in particular is looking for her. Again, because she as a pawn, she has a lot of political leverage as being the heir to a throne of one of the regions that they have conquered. And what else? We do finally get some interaction with Geralt and Yennefer in this. Always love their banter. It's always a joy to watch them spar with each other. I should have taken more notes. It's been more busy at work, so as I'm listening to audiobooks and stuff, I'm more distracted, and then like I don't go back and make notes about what I've read. So, sorry. So I am still enjoying it. I mean, it's gonna have reread value as I try to put all of these various moving pieces together. I do have to say, trigger warnings for sexual assault towards the end of the book. There's like actually like 2 instances, and one of them is just like, why did that's a choice. Okay, interesting. And the other one I need to reread because it's like magical sexual assault, and I'm like, what happened? I was not paying attention, and I'm driving, so I can't really like rewind it easily. And also, again, why? But all in all, I mean, I'm gonna keep on with the series. Super bummed about the news from the show that Henry Cavill is not gonna be in that role going forward. I'm super curious. What's the tea? Anyway, reading it just makes me want to like rewatch the show. At least the 2 seasons that are out so far. Man, ending on kind of a meh note, but I mean, all in all, I think it was like a pretty good reading month. Anyway, let me know how your October reading was. Let me know if you have read any of these other books, if any of these are on your TBR and you're excited to get to them. I will have my social media and other places where you can find me in the description box below. I encourage you to go out into the world and be curious. And I will catch you folks in my next video. Bye!